Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, all of a sudden they're all Christian. They have their crisis king on their little sleeves. No, all the Christians, the poor Christians, and they only want to talk about Israel. That made me really, really angry because number one, you're lying about Israel. Number two, Christians have been slaughtered by the millions. They're still enslaved and raped. I mean, it is 7th century Islam in these areas of the world where Christians will lose their lives. Silence.
Yep.
Nothing. And then all of a sudden, the Jews. And I said to the congregation, they said, they will stand before God and explain to him why they had nothing to say about our brothers and sisters in Christ being slaughtered until it came to wanting to dogpile on the Jews. And the whole issue within Christendom of who, quote unquote, killed Jesus has been a thing for 2,000 years. And anti-Semites have used it to attack the Jewish people for almost all those 2,000 years. So for him at Charlie Kirk's memorial to then get up and talk about Jews sitting around eating hummus, talking about what they're going to do to Jesus, to me...
Oh, but he didn't say Jews, he just said some people.
Some people, right. Some people, I think he said in Israel. So yeah, go ahead and draw. He knows how the game works.
Okay, everyone, welcome to another really special episode of JTV. I'm really delighted to be joined across the line, across the pond, by Pastor Dumisani Washington, who is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. And he's also the author of Zionism and the Black Church. And I first came across Pastor Dumisani when I saw that he's got a great social media account and following, and shared one of my recent conversations with Glenn Beck about rising anti-Semitism on the conservative right in America. And I kind of dug deeper into your social media content. And you, as I was just saying to you off air, you really have been holding the line on all these issues. And so first of all, thank you for everything you're doing, and welcome to JTV. And I think the first thing I'd love to do, Pastor, is just to know a bit more about you and what your own story and how you got involved in becoming such an outspoken advocate for Israel, and how your understanding of your faith in Christianity informs all of that.
Well, thanks, Oliver, for having me. Sure, we'll jump in. So in my book, Zionism and the Black Church, I do at the behest of a friend of mine, because this is actually the second edition. I didn't say very much about myself in the first edition. The second edition, I delved more into my background. Born in Little Rock, Arkansas in the late 1960s. This is during the segregated South. As a baby and the youngest of 7 children, my family, my father and mother and everybody moved to California in the late 60s. I was barely a year old, so we literally went from Little Rock to San Francisco in the late 1960s. And that's where I grew up. And so my church upbringing was, like I say, not unlike many people, especially Black Americans in the South. And it's infused with what we call a lot of spiritual Zionism. You and I were just talking about music, different types of music, different genres. When it comes to Black gospel music or any form of American music, which is pretty much based on, among other things, Negro spirituals and hymns and that type of thing, or rhythm and blues. These things are all the predecessors of things like rock and roll and jazz and everything. That's how we grew up. And the spiritual Zionism part was that the music and the teaching was always infused with our community, right? This is why you got songs like Go Down Moses, right? Let my people go. That's how you got songs like Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho. These are ancient stories of the Hebrew people, but they are sung in modern day in church and even later on during the civil rights movement. These things would be referred to by civil rights leaders in terms of the story from slavery to freedom through Jim Crow, all of those things. So there wasn't a lot of political talk where I was brought up, but there was the spiritual part of it, right? There was We're Marching to Zion and all these different songs. And as a musician, I grew up as well playing as a little kid. I had that gift. My father did as well, kind of that gene that got passed down. That was always a huge part of my upbringing. So spiritual Zionism kind of shaped me in that way. And then it was just later on, because I knew nothing about the modern state of Israel. And I'll just pause it here, get back to you, because it's a long, long story. But I'll pause it in 1984. That's my senior year of high school, 84, 85. November of 84, all those who know your modern Jewish history, that was actually Operation Moses, when the Ethiopian Jews were making Aliyah, had crossed the border from Ethiopia to Sudan. The Israeli planes. They come and they swoop down, and it becomes this huge story in the news. I didn't know anything about the modern state of Israel. I was literally on my way outside. To this day, I can still remember Peter Jennings' World News Tonight was on. And for all these young people, there was only 3 networks. There was no such thing as cable and 500 channels and nothing like that. It was ABC, NBC, CBS, and then your local station. And he was talking about a human interest story. And in the B-roll, Oliver, were 2 video clips, right? One was an old man who's Ethiopian Jew at the Ben Gurion airport kissing the ground. Scenes that people see even today. This was 1984. And then also was a woman who had a child wrapped around her back, like you would see often in African styles. And it captivated me. I had no idea what I was looking at. It wouldn't be until years later that I realized what that was and why it resonated with me so much when it came to the modern state of Israel, the Jewish people, and the modern day returning to the land that's spoken of from the scriptures. And boom, I'm watching it, even though at that moment I didn't realize what I was watching.
Fascinating. And when you talk about, the spiritual Zionism that you were raised with, how did that relate to Zionism in its modern form and the Jewish people? Because you could have that, but take it in all kinds of directions, and you could take it in a hostile direction as well.
Absolutely. This is why I'll do it personally, but I'll corporately as well. When it comes to, obviously, the word Zion is a biblical term. Zionism is more of a political term if you want to use it in the context of Theodor Herzl and then the founding fathers of modern Zionism, all of whom were not religious, as you know. Some of them were atheists. But it's funny that even though they were not religious per se, Zion is still a Bible word, right? So, and what does it refer to? It refers to Jerusalem, refers to the homeland. It becomes this generic term that actually describes the Jewish liberation movement, the homeland for the Jewish people. The political part of it, obviously, is that a homeland is not just a metaphor for something. It's actually a physical land. So what you and I live in at this time is that Zionism has been so attacked and so propagandized that when people hear it, they'll often associate something negative, like the landmark ruling in 1975 of the United Nations, Zionism is a form of racism, which was a blatant lie, right? It's like saying Pan-Africanism is a form of anti-white sentiment. No, it's actually a mindset of the African states coming together. It's not about hating someone else. It's actually about galvanizing a certain amount of unity, right? So that's part of what that was. So for me, the connection, and it wasn't just for me, that's a personal part of it in terms of seeing it in that way. But here's the connection, that because of what Zionism is, in its form of being the liberation movement of the Jewish people, right? If we're keeping that actual definition for a moment, there is then now the intersection of, if I can use that term, spiritual and political. The spiritual part is that's what Zion is, actually the physical, that David called it Zion, Mount Zion, Jerusalem. These things are metaphor. They're all the same names for the same place, right? But also that it also becomes, both within the scriptures, a sign of this one born in Zion, awake, O Zion. God uses it as a term through the prophets. It's personified, right? Not just a mountain or a place, but the people of Zion. God actually calls the people Zion, right? So that becomes fused with recognizing Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. And I'll say this, and for those who it has nothing to do with the political part, here's the thing. Then why do Israel haters call Jesus a Palestinian? It goes back to the exact same thing, right? Why? Because the attempt to erase Zion, Israel, Jews, here it is. You can call it spiritual. We can get into that too. But here's the political part. Why does the United Nations, under the watchful eye of like the Marxist powers and Arab nationalists who are trying to destroy Israel, why do they take then a term like Zionism and then lie and say that it represents apartheid, those types of things? Because they're trying to delegitimize the Jewish state of Israel. And what do? They go to the term Zionism and they demonize that, hoping that those two things are connected. What they don't know that they're doing is they're going to the Bible, and they're just like calling Jesus, because you and I both know Palestine means Philistine. So those people call Jesus a Palestinian or calling him a Philistine just because that's ridiculous. To say that Zion, which is the homeland of the Jewish people, that there's something wrong with the Jewish people having a homeland, therein is the rub. So for me, those things have always been connected. Yes, it's a biblical reality, but it's also a geopolitical reality. It is the most successful restoration movement in modern history, that these Jewish people who almost 2,000 years didn't have a land, and because of Zionism, they can yell and scream all about they want it. I'll say this last thing real quick, Oliver. Even Israel's enemies would point to Zionism as a good thing. Malcolm X, and I can almost quote it, said, Pan-Africanism will do for people of African descent all over the world the same that Zionism has done for Jews all over the world. Now, this man was no Zionist, quote unquote.
Right.
But why does he point to Zionism? He points to it as saying that this is something that has rallied the Jewish people worldwide. People of African descent can learn from that and applying that to Pan-Africanism. This was Malcolm X.
Fascinating. And it's so farcical. People try and create this a wedge between Zionism and Judaism and Jews, the Torah. Because, like, literally, I just say to people, have you read the Bible? It is like the first book of the 5 books of Moses is hardly interested, in fact, in the religion element of it, the commandments. All God wants to talk about is the Jews and the land. And then it becomes a story of this people of Israel going to their land of Israel. Oh, but that has nothing to do with Zionism. You know, it's absurd. And, you know, people try to create all these distinctions. Well, you know, what's that got to do with Netanyahu and all that? It doesn't. Zionism is simply Jews should live in sovereignty in their land. That's it. But what I'm curious to know is, from your experience, is there more solidarity or hostility in the Black community and Black church, particularly in America, when it comes to Israel and Jews?
There's definitely not more hostility. So in other words, I appreciate the question, because this is one of the ones that we get or similar to it often. Within the Black community, and I'm talking about Black Americans, and again, let's get all the disclaimers out of the way. There's no monolith. People are not the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the generic, just like you're asking the general question, generally, the Black American community continues to favor Israel's being able to defend itself. I'll say this way. The polls that have been done, for example, about Israel, American views of Israel, particularly post October 7th, are generally done by breaking down political party or affiliation, sometimes ethnicity. What people have to understand is that when they often have the perception that Black people as a whole are either anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic, whatever, 2 things that they're dealing with. Number one, the only people that they can point to and say that about in some sort of definitive sense are like the Louis Farrakhan's, then the past, the Jesse Jackson, the type of thing. After that, their list gets really short. Because they can't name Black figures who, with any standing, who have those types of views. And even for Farrakhan and Jesse Jackson, you have to go back to the 70s to talk about, I mean, that started, and Farrakhan still does it now, but I'm just saying that kind of thing, that was from a long time ago. They'll point to Al Sharpton, again, right, and rightly so. We've called all those people out in the past as well. But again, modern terms of right now, this is not the case. What you have is a co-opting of narrative. What we found, 2 things, I'm sorry, go back to this part. When it comes to any type of poll, there's been no poll done to really assess Black attitudes where Israel is concerned in general. I point to October the 7th because the vast majority, you're probably aware of this, I know you're across the pond, they found that where there's a real disparity is political. If they leaned right, they were more in favor of Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. If they leaned left, they're more pro-Hamas, or at the very least pro-Palestinian, that type of thing. And because Black Americans tend to vote overwhelmingly Democrat, that's how that would often get kind of illustrated. Even though, again, from our work, we travel the country, we speak with pastors and leaders. What we've often found, Oliver, is more true is that there'll be Black American leaders who either do stand with Israel or have questions about what's going on, but they don't feel the confidence to speak about it. Therefore, often is the reason why there's sometimes a vacuum in Black voices in this space. What does get co-opted is Black voices with stuff like Black Lives Matter, which is extremely anti-Israel, extremely anti-Semitic, and we've called that out. But Black Lives Matter has never spoken for the majority of Black Americans on a host of issues, including Israel. Like go to the police brutality type of thing. I mean, the defund the police. 81% of Black Americans were completely against that measure, but most people don't know that because Black Lives Matter and Jewish Voice for Peace were out there going blah, 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 and we speak for the Black community. They did not. And that was just one example of many. So, no, what we found in the Black community, there's as much nuance as there is anywhere else, but particularly for those that are Black Christians, and they're still the most church-going actually demographic in the United States. To this day, Black Americans go to church more than any other demographic, literally. They still have either a biblical view of the whole spiritual Zionism, or at the very least will be even-handed, like, yeah, I want Israel to be able to defend itself, and yeah, I don't want the Palestinians to be abused, and I don't want them to be starved, and all that stuff that's coming from the media. I want to say this last thing here, and we can delve into it more if we need to. When it comes to this issue, we've partnered with another group, and we have a series out that's called it's a video series that I can't remember right now. We Are Not the Same, and so people can go on my website. They can go on IBSI's social media, and there's 7 chapters. We've done 4 of them already, and it's called "We Are Not the Same," and the subtitle is "How Free Palestine Exploited the Black Community." And we take time to actually explain to people why they would often see a correlation between the Palestinian movement and Black liberation. Why that is, since the 1960s, it has always been a smoke and mirrors thing, but it was effective, Oliver, because as you and I have, and I don't assume your age, I'm sure I have my kids, you're about your age, the college campuses that are on fire in terms of Israel hatred, anti-Semitism, are not Black colleges, what we call in the United States HBCUs, historically Black colleges. They are CUNY, they are UCLA, they are USC, and on predominantly white campuses where there's maybe 2% Black Americans. Why? Because of the disinformation, the propaganda that was used to make Free Palestine a liberation and civil rights movement. That's often how that gets so murky when it comes to the Black community. They didn't speak for us, they exploited us and our story. Hope that makes sense.
And they try to do the same thing with Jewish suffering as well, and the Jewish story, misappropriating the Holocaust and applying that to Gaza. I mean, it's sick. And one thing I've always found quite curious in a way, and a bit of a contradiction, is that you're right. I find that the Black faith communities are especially just devout, culturally conservative, and yet you have also this tendency more towards democratic politically. There's a bit of like a contradiction there, isn't there?
Yes. Well, it's funny. Here's a parallel with that in the Jewish community. The vast majority of American Jews are completely pro-Israel. We're called Zionists. But the vast majority of American Jews vote Democrat, which has been the most hostile to Israel, particularly over the last 20 years. Isn't that amazing? Same thing in the Black community. The vast majority, for example.
But there's one key difference here is that that's not among the religious observant Jews. They tend to lean more conservative. So that's why this difference is a bit more hard to understand here.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. There's a smaller proportion of Black Americans who are very religious, who vote leaning right. This is why this last election, Donald Trump, I believe the Black vote went to him, the largest Black vote to Republicans since the days of Richard Nixon. So this was very historic in that way. And rest assured, much of it had to do with the left going so far left, right? And so completely off the grid that it alienated a lot of people, including the percentage of Black Americans. And so for the Israel part of it too, there's something else that you just said. Oh, it's going to come back to me. But yes, so that part of it, with the voting part, one last example, just in terms of voting, right? It's one of those contradictions. The vast majority of Black Americans, for example, are pro-education choice. The Democrats are completely pro-public school and will shut down choice charter schools. Anything looks like it's not public schools. And once again, though Black Americans still vote for that party, they're always a contradiction with that party. That's just one of many examples, right? They have found or felt that their interests lie. It's funny. Again, go back to Malcolm X. Not that it's just 1966, 65, 63, whatever, because he's killed in 65. He gave a speech called The Ballad of the Bullet. He's very radical, right? And he was upset with the Black community then for voting 80% Democrat. Now it's closer to the 90%, although it's kind of tapered down a little bit since Trump. So that's been the case for the last 60 years. And that again has to do with, though there's a lot of contradiction there, they still have felt that their lot was better where the Democrats were concerned, right or wrong, right? So I disagree with that, but we can get into that too.
Right, fascinating. And I wonder if you could give us a few words on the whole Black Israelites phenomenon. You know, they believe they are the real Jews. What are your thoughts on that? Before we continue, I want to share something important with you. The entire anti-Israel movement is built on one central accusation, that in 1948, Israel stole the land and ever since Palestinians have simply been resisting. But what if everything we've been told about this story is untrue? What if the real history of 1948 shows not Arabs being forced out, but Jews, while seeking peace, having to fight for their survival against a genocidal enemy that willed its destruction long before Israel's re-establishment? Watch the trailer for our new, groundbreaking and essential documentary entitled What Really Happened in 1948. And if you want to see the full film, just click the link in the video description. In 1948, the world witnessed the rebirth of the Jewish state, the State of Israel. A moment celebrated as a miracle of survival and self-determination after centuries of persecution and the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet for decades, this event has been twisted into a narrative of theft and catastrophe, with the so-called Nakba portrayed as Israel's original sin, where Jews allegedly stole Arab land and displaced innocents in a premeditated act of ethnic cleansing. But what if this story is fundamentally inverted? What if the cause and effect are the other way around? Not Israel aggressively seizing territory and Arabs responding in self-defense, but Arabs, driven by deep-seated hatred, rejecting the Jews' legal and historical rights to live in their ancestral homeland and waging a genocidal war long before Israel's re-establishment. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to uncover the unvarnished truth about 1948, the centuries of pogroms and anti-Semitic violence that set the stage, the Arab leaders' explicit calls for extermination, and the defensive war Israel fought to secure its existence. We'll challenge the pervasive lies head-on, showing how Arab rejection of peace wasn't about creating a Palestinian state, but about denying Jews the right to live at all. From the Nazi-allied leader of the Arabs in Palestine, the Mufti al-Husseini, to the forgotten occupations by Jordan and Egypt, where no Palestinian state was even considered, this is the story of a conflict rooted not in displacement, but in whether the Jews deserve to live in their homeland. Join us as we debunk the myths with facts, confront the historical record fairly but firmly, and reveal why 1948 was not an act of aggression, but a righteous response to annihilation. This is what really happened in 1948. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description. And I wonder if you could give us a few words on the whole Black Israelites phenomenon. You know, they believe they are the real Jews. What are your thoughts on that?
So again, nuance. So there is the radical ones that you're talking about there that everybody knows about in terms of social media. These are, I've done this for years now, for a long time, fairly broken individuals who have been somewhat brainwashed by an ideology that feels like gives them certain amount of legitimacy, right? Not so much searching out Torah, not so much finding, even if there are Jewish roots there, right? I happen to be one of those who believes that the Igbo of West Africa, and I have some elder Igbo friends who work with that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they actually are part of the tribes of Israel. I've seen this for a while, and it's amazing discussion, right? But that having been said, the whole I'm Jewish and you're not because I'm darker skinned, you're not, it's the same thing of white supremacists, right? There was a section of the Mormon church who believed that they were the lost tribes and the other Jews were not, and so they just happen to be white, right? So this is unfortunately another deep form of replacement theology. It has filled, or it is filling, a vacuum in terms of brokenness, in terms of family. I know personally of some of those who are part of some of those more radical, and I'll tell you what I mean by the radical Black Hebrew Israelite sects, who left, who had horror stories. The emotional abuse that they suffered, the homes and marriages and families that were destroyed, because this was within this Black Hebrew Israelite sect, right? There's a certain amount of misogyny and everything. And people who are going to watch this, oh, that's not true. It's completely true. I'm not going to dime those people out, but I mean, then okay, it's funny on YouTube, not funny. There was trending for a little while of Black people who were part of that group who began to tell their stories, who would like go on YouTube and share with other people, warning them about those people, some of them whose lives were threatened, right? So it's a cult, right? The reason I say the radical is because there's also this, from the late 1800s, this sect of Black Americans who had a couple of leaders, they kind of splintered off a couple of times, who have been in their sects observant in terms of Torah, learning Hebrew, keeping kosher, the whole thing from going back to the end of the 19th century. And so that group would be characterized or connected to Rabbi Capers Fune. I don't know if you know that name. He's a leader that's based in Chicago. They're pro-Israel. They don't see themselves as we're black and the real Jews, that type of thing. And they've been very much integrated in much of the more, I would say probably the, what's that term? Oliver, you can help me. The Reform Jewish community, if I'm saying it
Yep.
that way, not so much
Yep.
Orthodox. I have rabbi friends who've visited their shuls, those Hebrew Israelite, if you want to call them shuls. Sometimes they don't use that term because of how it's been used in these other ways. They do Shabbat things together. They do other observances together. So the reason I say radical ones, because these are the ones that I'm going to explain to you now. This historic group, they aren't anti-Israel. They aren't anti-white, quote unquote. They are, and again, they work within the broader. Some of them are part of this. What's that called? The board of rabbis in New York, and that type of. I have some friends who are part of that. One of our MC ambassadors, Rabbi Yaakov Hadani, he's part of it as well. And I've had amazing conversations with them, conversations with them, along with other parts of the mainstream Jewish communities and everything. And it's been an interesting thing. I recognize, and we recognize it's very controversial because there are people who don't accept their story, if you will, or whatever that is. And I get that part of it. I can go delve further into that. Me as a non-Jewish Christian pastor, have respect for all of them. We don't try to get in and settle some of those more deeper debates and discussions. But what we have found over the years is that the last group I described to you, does not affiliate with, and I've seen like Rabbi Capers Fune especially has actually condemned those ones for all their violence and that type of thing. So yeah, there is nuance there, but most people are aware of those ones who are there praising Hitler, praising the Nazis, the whole thing, that praising the Palestinians as if the Palestinians wouldn't kill them as fast as they would kill you or anybody else. It's just the Palestinians mean the terrorists. So yeah, it's kind of nuts here in the United States, especially. So yeah, we're aware of those groups as well.
Okay, that's really super insightful. Thank you. And as I mentioned at the start, I first came across you when you shared or commented on my discussion with Glenn Beck about rising anti-Semitism on the conservative right in America. This was something I really didn't see coming. I always kind of thought the conservative right were pretty strong and unified when it came to Israel and the Jewish people. And but we've seen figures, the past few years, slowly becoming more and more outspoken, people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, and then people who are sort of a bit more in the middle, and, we're starting to see basically what could potentially lead to a full-on divergence between different factions on the right. The first thing I want to know is, how do you unpack what's going on, and particularly with some of the key ringleaders that I just mentioned? And what do you think is the cause of their hostility to Israel?
Let me do the second one first. It could be any number of things, right? I've heard the discussions around whether Tucker Carlson, one of his main backers being, I guess, a Pakistani, and I don't know if he's also whatever his other ethnicity is, and whether or not that has something to do with it, who this person is. We have looked at that, we've seen that, and we'll dismiss it, but we don't hang everything on that as well. So some of that could be the outside influence, the Qatars, as you know, the billions of dollars that go to our schools, everything. I think it was ISGAP, Charles Asher's small group, that says that Qatar is operating a war chest between $500 billion and $1 trillion to affect soft power in the U.S. So that money's going somewhere, right? So is it going to those people? I don't know, but it's plausible, right? So that's part of it. I think that if I leave my pastor hat on for a moment, along with that, Oliver, or even in place of that, is there's a spiritual component, obviously, to it, right? We know that hatred for Israel, in terms of the scripture, back to the Bible, is hatred for God, right? Psalm 83, God, your enemies are making a tumult against your people because they want you. They hate you, so they hate your people. The Bible's very, very clear about that, right? That hatred for Israel is hatred for God. So that being a spirit, it is expanding on the right, in large part, our opinion, our organization's opinion, because of the ignorance of what it actually is. See, one of the things that we were doing from a while ago, especially leading up to the reelection of President Trump. When we saw some of these elements more and more, well, go back even further. Fall of 2022 is when we first started sounding the alarm. And this was when Kanye West goes full Hitler. Candace co-signs with him immediately. People think that she just recently. No, she was immediately there with him, defending him and everything. And Tucker Carlson platforms Kanye and tries to hide some of his anti-Jewish speech. This was all going on now, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
A year before October 7th. When that was happening, what we pointed out was simply this. Tucker Carlson with this huge platform, Candace with their huge platform, they were making these clearly anti-Semitic statements, and no one was calling them out. And this was parallel to the left about 10 years ago when Ilhan Omar, before there was a squad, Oliver, there was a couple of people in Congress, Israel and the Jews, right? The problem wasn't just what they were saying, because it was a lie, right? Israel's hypnotizing the world and yada, yada, yada. It was that there was nobody of weight or substance on the left who would call them out. So when it happened on the right, we heard all the excuses. Oh, Tucker's not in Congress. We just rolled our eyes, right? Because again, I'm holding the line. That's what I get from my parents. I'm just I'm a no nonsense kind of, I like to laugh and play like anybody else, have a good time. But when it ain't funny, it ain't funny. If it's not a game, it's not a game. This is not a game, right? This is a very, very serious thing. So what we were simply saying was that there weren't really any Republicans or people on the right of note who were calling them out. And I'm not saying cancel, right? People, oh, you're cancel culture. No, people have the freedom to say whatever they want to say unless they're trying to incite violence against somebody. I'm saying, do you have the moral wherewithal to actually call someone out, particularly if it's coming from your camp? And you didn't find it. So Tucker has been joined by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Steve Bannon, Jack Posobiec, Matt Gaetz. Right now, you're having a growing, and people will say, oh, Pastor Dumisani, it's small. That's exactly what they said about Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. They would literally say, oh, we're not going to say anything. The vast majority of the Democratic Party stands with Israel, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward to now, not so much, right? Why? Because the nature of it. If you're going to allow a cancer to just sit there, what kind of doctor is that? Oh, yeah, it's there, but yeah, we'll just kind of hope and pray. And yeah, we're actually going to deal with it because it's localized here. Otherwise, it spreads. So this anti-Jewish sentiment on the right has expanded, if not, Oliver, in terms of number, definitely in terms of rhetoric, right? Because you have other people openly saying, well, what about the USS Liberty? Okay, we have to really have that conversation and really talk about what happened in 1967, right? But no, well, the Jews. So everything, especially on the right, has become the Jews. Even God, Charlie Kirk's assassination, you and I both know, to the degree that the prime minister of Israel gets up and does a video as if he doesn't have enough to do, to push down conspiracy theories coming from the right that somehow Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's murder. Not to mention the fact that Charlie Kirk, as vocal as he was, talked often about how Islam was not compatible with the West, how Sharia should be abolished. So somehow, am I saying that Muslims did it? No. What I'm saying is that if you're going to have a real conversation about who the culprits might be, could you please be honest and stop talking about the Jews? This is what has been facilitated by the right ignoring Tucker, right? And I'll say this last thing. It's still going on. Candace has been rightfully categorized as a Jew-hating person off the chain. I made the case to people for a while. Tucker is no better. They just have different approaches. Candace is more shrill, so she'll get on somebody's nerves. Tucker does the that stupid laugh, right? And they'll just say he's asking questions. He's just right. Just the other day, was yesterday before, he's talking again about how Israel is the one that baited us into going and invading Iraq, when the opposite is true. The Israeli leaders of Israel were telling George Bush, sorry about jargon, dude, no, Iran is the main thing. Leave Iraq alone. Why is Tucker doing that? Again, is it money? Whatever it is, he's locked in. Now he's gaslighting people even more. I'm not really talking about the Jews all the time. Only Zionists and anti-Zionists talk about Jews all the time. That's straight gaslighting. No, Tucker, you do. Just like you tell people that Israel persecutes Christians. As a Christian pastor who's been advocating for the persecuted church since the 1990s, I can tell you that Tucker's 100% full of it, right? None about the Christians in Sudan, Nigeria, Mauritania, Syria, nothing, right? The Christians of Israel, which are the freest Christians in the region, this is the danger and has become accepted on the right to a degree.
Yeah. And I think it's part of because there's this kind of sense of like, Puritanism on the right. Like you don't attack our own, and we all have to, you can't go after people like Tucker and whatever. And actually, if you're going after him, then you're the enemy. And a lot of people think that on the right thing, well, if it's not worth the fallout I'm going to get from my own following by doing that, and it kind of becomes this evil cycle. And I completely agree with you that Tucker Carlson is. He's to me, he's identical to Candace, but he's a lot shrewder in how he goes about it, and he's clever, and he's subtle, but also just if you just lean into what he's saying, it's just such clear gaslighting. And one of those examples that I felt was just a few days ago at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. I was watching it live, and I knew Charlie personally, and let's talk about Charlie in a minute. But my jaw literally hit the floor because I thought, no way will he politicize the actual memorial event. And I mean, before I give you my thoughts on what he said, maybe you could just outline what he said and give your perspective, and then we can see what there's to discuss.
Just today, was that today? I got about 3 or 4 different messages, WhatsApp messages, asking me to come on their platforms to discuss what Tucker said at the memorial. And one of them in particular, I'm going to say to you now what I'm going to say to them when we talk. I know them already, but we'll talk about before we go on the actual show. So I wasn't surprised that Tucker did it, and I called it out, but not for all the reasons people may think. So the whole issue, and Oliver, I'm not assuming your age, but I'm sure you're aware of this already. The whole issue within Christendom of who, quote unquote, killed Jesus has been a thing for 2,000 years. And anti-Semites have used it to attack the Jewish people for almost all those 2,000 years. Anti-replacement theology, anti-Semitism within the church is as old as the church. So my feeling on it, if you will, is where now the Tucker thing is concerned. My issue wasn't around drawing a parallel, if it were somebody else, about Jesus being killed for his views, because that is true. He would say certain things and it made people angry. Were the Jewish people involved? Well, I mean, his main audience was Jewish. The Romans were the ones who actually executed him, right? There's no nailing somebody to a cross within the Torah anywhere, right? But yes, did he have political enemies within the Jewish leadership? Yes, he did. I mean, so did Jeremiah, right? This is actually how that works. So my issue isn't so much having the discussion, even the theological discussion around who Jesus's enemies were, what the political mechanisms were, what the religious leaders versus the political leaders, the Herods, the Pilates, all that kind of stuff. I mean, fine. My issue is this. Tucker has already gone on record in lying about Jews and lying about Israel for the last 3 years at least. So for him at Charlie Kirk's memorial to then get up and talk about Jews sitting around eating hummus, talking about what they're going to do to Jesus, to me.
But he didn't say Jews. He just said some people.
Some people, right? Some people, I think he said in Israel. So yeah, go ahead and draw. Like you said, I said, one thing about Tucker, he and I are on the same age. I'm 58, he's 56. So we're from the same era. Tucker has been in media most of his life. He's been a part of the aristocracy. He'll tell you himself, all of his life, right? So he knows how the game works. He knows how the propaganda game works. So he's not, the reason I say 56 is because he's not a 20-something-year-old just trying to figure it out. He's been doing this for a while. So he knows how to get clicks and views and the whole thing. So Tucker knows how to say, okay, I compare him to Barack Obama on the left. Barack Obama give an hour-long speech. People talk about how eloquent it was, this and the other. But if people who were really listening said, okay, what he's really saying is that Iran has every right to build a nuclear weapon. Everybody needs to get over it. That's what he really said, but he didn't say it that way. So everybody's thinking he said something wonderful. Tucker's the same thing. So if you boil down to what he says is that the Jews are responsible for this, and this. And anybody who contradicts him is somehow themselves un-American. He has been lying on Ben Shapiro for several years. I don't know Ben at all. And I know we had some experience. What I'm saying is that I would imagine at some point somebody probably talked about defamation. This is a very specific lie. I'm gonna tell you what I mean. I'll go back to the memorial. Okay. He has been saying, if people don't believe it, go Google it. He's been saying that Ben Shapiro is advocating for U.S. troops on the ground in Israel. No, not just fighting, quote unquote, Israel's wars. It's a blood libel that somehow Ben Shapiro, who's an Orthodox Jew, and again, I don't know him, so it's not like I'm advocating for Ben, right? An Orthodox Jew who is an American patriot, loves his country, loves Israel, nothing wrong with any of those things, is a quote unquote Zionist, that somehow his wanting a strong US-Israel relationship, a military like AIPAC, like Kufi, somehow that means Ben and people like him, like me, want American troops in Tel Aviv, want American troops at the border of Syria. It's not true. It's never been true, but Tucker said it so many times that a bunch of people on the right just repeat it, not even knowing that they got it from Tucker. That's how dangerous it is. So it makes someone who's pro-Israel, who's American, Jewish or not, look like they want American blood spilled in Gaza. That has never been the case. And so for Tucker to then, with that resume, get up at Charlie Kirk's memorial, instead of making the focus Charlie and his family and stuff, like, no, he wants to then throw shade at the Jews and then connecting it to this age-old things. Jews are Christ killers. That's, for me, was the issue. It wasn't about the theological discussion about what happened in the book of the Gospels. It was about Tucker, who's very clearly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, lobbing that grenade into this auditorium. It was not just inappropriate. I was expecting it because that's Tucker. He's showing you who he is. And I'm sorry, you didn't ask for this. I have to say it's not loud. The guy gets out, get in trouble too. This is also why our organization also called out TPUSA, meaning if Tucker's resume is clear, but TPUSA keeps, shortly after that memorial, they did a fundraising thing. I have a couple of friends who are members of TPUSA. They got a fundraising text for Tucker. I'm going, wow. So TPUSA is not going to actually disavow some of this anti-Jewish stuff. You're going to actually lean in. And I'm going to say this like this right here. That's the first time I said it publicly. I said publicly before, Jew hatred destroyed the Democratic Party. It is in the process of destroying the Republican Party. It will destroy TPUSA. It will. If that's not nipped in the bud, if Tucker is going to be their mascot of choice, if he's going to be their fundraising person, TPUSA, I don't know any of your leaders. Let me say this to you right now. If you don't deal with that, it will destroy that organization.
Yeah. And there were a few other points that I felt when I watched that Tucker clip as well. And in addition to everything you're saying, first of all, he was so clever in that he had plausible deniability. Because he could just say, well, who knows who I could be talking about? Maybe I'm talking about the Romans. I just spoke about people eating hummus, even though everyone knows when you think about people in the Middle East and Israel eating hummus, it's so clever. But I saw him interviewed just the other day, and he said, well, I mean, who says Arabs also eat hummus? I'm sorry, there weren't any Arabs that are central to the Jesus story, are there? And then
not at all.
The other key points I think of is he knows, he's not an idiot. He knows that for the past 10 days, there is a context that there's been all these attacks, that conspiracies that Israel was behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And then, by the way, the nerve for him to say, why is Netanyahu making it about him when he thanks Charlie for his support of Israel? I'm sorry, if you some great speaker in another country that's been standing up for you gets martyred, it would be immoral not to, when everyone's memorializing him, to express gratitude to him for standing up for your country. It's not making it about him. And then, so you've got all that context, and he uses that those words of people in a lamplit room, which, by the way, touches on so many anti-Semitic tropes of Jewish power and all of that, and speaks about hummus. You really mean to tell me he is completely ignorant of all of that? It's a complete joke. And more than that, the analogy actually doesn't work, because he's saying it's about people in power conspiring to kill him. This was some random student, So actually, it's another way in which the analogy doesn't quite fit, and he's just trying to, in my mind, lean into, give a wink and a nod to the notion that Israel's behind it. And I don't know if you saw, but he had a text message where he said, I find anti-Semites and Zionists have one thing in common. They seem to think everything's about them. And that, for me, is the dead giveaway, because most Jews are Zionists.
Yes. So, that was what I was referring to. Yeah, you're right. He said anti-Semites and Zionists. So I did see that. Again, that's the further the gaslighting. And you're right. He always gives himself plausible deniability until, well, for example, what I found is that he has yet to be platformed or be interviewed by somebody who will actually really interview him, who will actually really hold him to task. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, because there's many, many examples. You just gave a few good ones. I co-wrote an article for Tablet with my friend Karis Ray called The Arsonist. wasn't smart enough to come up with that title. I think the publishers did, and it was talking about Tucker Carlson. This was after he had platformed the Bethlehem pastor. There's a Palestinian pastor in Bethlehem. You and I both know, Oliver, that Bethlehem is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Most other people don't know that. So you say Bethlehem, you think birthplace of Jesus, you think the Jews, and boom, right? So if you say that Jews are being persecuted in Bethlehem, your average person is going to think that the Jewish state is persecuting people in the town where Jesus was born. You and I both know that's not true. So he had this pastor on who we found out is connected to Hamas, praised October 7th, the whole thing, right? He's an Arab Christian pastor. And he was talking about how basically Israel, just all these blood libels, the persecution that whole issue of at some point before Oslo, there's like 80% Christian population in Bethlehem. Now it's like 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And somehow that's the Jews, that's Israel. None of that is true. That shows you what the Palestinian Authority has been doing to the Christians in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, just like what's going on in Gaza, right? Even worse there, right? So Tucker, the reason I'm saying all that is this, ladies and gentlemen. So Tucker has him on, lets him spew. This is before the other woman that he had on, who's a nun, I guess, a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, right? Tucker does this, again, with the clear intention of driving a wedge between the Christian and the Jewish community, particularly in the States. Why? Because he starts off the conversation. Go back and watch it, ladies and gentlemen. He says, for you who support Israel, your tax dollars are supporting this. And he goes on, lets this guy go on, no questions or anything else like that. And when we saw it, there's two things, many things came to mind, but two. Number one, obviously, like I said, nothing is being done truthfully. He's not telling who these people are. He's not telling them that the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, the PLO, Fatah, they're the reason why this guy's being persecuted, not the Jewish state of Israel, that the Arab Christians in Israel are growing in number, they're happy, they're free. They even asked Dennis Prager about it later on, and we shared some of that clip as well. He basically, and Dennis, we're praying for you. Same thing. He's not as, Dennis is more diplomatic than me. I'm more, whatever. That's like going to Tucker's full of it. Right? He knows exactly what he's doing. But the first thing was that Tucker knew what he was doing with that. But the other part of it, I'm going to go back to what I said.
It's actually, by the way, it's an insult. If he doesn't know what he's doing, then he's just stupid. So it'd be an insult if he doesn't know.
This is a journalist of 40-something years in the industry. So come on, at some point, you can't really chalk it up to you don't know, right? And you're pretty well off. So even if you didn't know, you have a whole staff. You don't have to even bother yourself with researching something. Just have one of your interns go give you a 10-page paper on blah, blah, blah. So when you get up before the camera and lie like a rug, you're doing it intentionally, right? That's just, there's no other way about that. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
For me, long before Israel advocacy, right, in the 90s as a young pastor, I go back a little more. I became aware of how Christians are persecuted worldwide while in college. This is the 1980s. A friend of mine went to where was it? Czechoslovakia. I believe it was Nicolae Ceausescu, who was a dictator. He was killed. My friend was on a missionary journey there with some other groups, and they're passing out Bibles and everything. So it was a communist dictatorship, and what happens under communism with Jews and Christians and religion and everything, right? So I found out about this as a kid, as in college, right? So it's in the 90s. I'm a young pastor, minister, and so I started doing some research, and I adopt one of my nations I adopted, Sudan, where the Christian Darfur region, this is back in the 90s, the internet was barely a thing, right? So I had been literally advocating, I'm not bragging, this is not I really want people to understand context. Since the mid 1990s, I've been writing snail mail letters, Oliver, to my representatives. Well, I grew up in California. At that time, the senators were Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, right? I'm writing later on to the Secretary of State. I'm writing to the UN. I'm saying, and later on when you have email, I'm saying we need to say something, needs to be a statement. So I've been advocating, I would subscribe to things like Voice of the Martyrs. So as a young, and I would teach our church would have a persecuted church day, right? We would actually talk about what's going on in different parts of the world, and we would pray for them. We have different speakers. So this was something we were all in. So when you fast forward to 2023 or whatever, and these Johnny-come-latelys like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, all of a sudden, they're all Christian. They have their crisis king on their little sleeves. No, all the Christians, the poor Christians, and they only want to talk about Israel. That made me really, really angry. It touched me very deep because, number one, you're lying about Israel. Number two, Christians have been slaughtered by the millions. They're still enslaved and raped. I mean, it is 7th century Islam in these areas of the world where Christians will lose their life. Not just Christians. If you're African and Muslim, you'll get slaughtered too because you're African. Silence.
Yeah.
Nothing. And then all of a sudden, the Jews. And I said to the congregation, they said, they will stand before God. and explained to him why they had nothing to say about our brothers and sisters in Christ being slaughtered until it came to wanting to dogpile on the Jews and lie about the Jewish state, that I take very, very, very seriously.
I'm so excited to share with you something that I've been working on for a while. We've just taken JTV content to the next level. Introducing JTV Plus, a new platform streaming exclusive content created and handpicked by me. Get ready for jaw-dropping documentaries, exclusive interviews, insider access, and so much more. JTV Plus brings you captivating stories that will shock and inspire you. Stories that, honestly, I'm discovering for the first time too. From Israel to Jewish history to Judaism, it's all there. In exclusive interviews, you'll hear guests open up about things they've never shared publicly before. Plus, I'll take you behind the scenes where I get a lot more personal with you. By joining JTV Plus, you're not just joining an exclusive community, you're partnering with me to help JTV reach new heights. Just search j-tv.plus and join our exclusive community today. There's a link in the video description. I'll see you there. Absolutely, spoken so well, and it's painful. It's painful to see the evil and the lies that's still so prevalent in our times. And I want to know, you mentioned Charlie Kirk and Turning Point. I have conversations with him and his team over the past year or two or three since all these issues started to come to the fore of the right in America. And I wanted to know your perspective on this, because it was very clear to me that Charlie was a staunch defender of Israel and Jewish people. And on the one hand, I kind of felt like when sometimes he would offer critiques of Israel, I sometimes would feel, look, Jews are critical of Israel. There's a difference between being against a particular policy and against the project of Jews living in Israel and Zionism and all of that. I didn't have an issue with that. My problem was that I felt that sometimes arguments were made, and I can still judge him favorably for this, but they were made in order to keep a fragile coalition together, which means that it's not actually being said in order, because he believes it's true, but because he needs to show the hostile side, look, I'm not in the pocket of Israel. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And again, I'm trying to say this as in the best possible way to him, to say that, look, he's trying to hold a coalition together that's potentially diverging. But I wonder, is there a way that you could look at this in a more... I just wonder, what's your assessment of that?
So... For those who want to, let me say this in context. First of all, we did a couple of pieces on that. We have a Substack called the Africa Israel Weekly, and I wrote a piece shortly after Charlie, right after his assassination. And my son, who's his executive director, he wrote one maybe 2 or 3 days later. And we entitled it "Charlie Kirk and Israel, It's Complicated." And this is not just a plug for our Substack, but people who want to read, it's very well done. My son wrote it, and we put it out there. And I'm not saying it because my son's organization, but it's. Some of the comments on there is like, thank you, because this is the only one we see like this. So we took Charlie Kirk to task, starting with in 2023, shortly after Israel's campaign in Gaza, obviously after October 7th, 2023, right? And when we did so, again, we don't know him personally, so it wasn't a personal attack or anything like that, or against TPUSA, anything like that. But when he had, mentioned about Israel attacking or the bombing the church, right? Candace Owens, people were saying this. And when we called it out, it very much in the vein of what I just said to you now, that number one, Charlie, who's always young, he was old enough to know that the people reporting that was probably the Hamas Ministry of Health. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. We found out, Oliver, that wasn't true. They didn't bomb a church, and the structure that actually got damaged was another structure near the church. And though even the case that Hamas hides in churches and they put weapons in churches, okay. So we called them out for that, and we said the same thing. I'm saying this for a reason. We said, hey, not only was that not true, and you kind of put it out there like that, there are Christians, Charlie. I've known about you for a little while, like the Tucker thing. Have you ever, when a Christian in the United States is going to talk about what Israel does to Christians, and they have no track record of ever bringing that up, that's going to be, as I've already demonstrated, an issue for people like me, like going, where have you been for the last 30, 40 years? Okay, so we were upset with that. Were we calling him anti-Semite? No, we just said, look, this is really, really bad form, right? This is like, don't, okay. So, and then our also other thing was that, to our knowledge, he never really corrected that. Like, you have millions of followers, right? It's not like you got 3 people following you on X. And you might want to come back and say, hey, we found out. Here's what actually happened. So again, we didn't chalk it up to Charlie hates Jews. We just said, okay, this was a bad situation.
By the way, he did, I know that the IDF replied to his tweet, and then he clarifying what happened, and then he said thank you and retweeted that. But I still, but the reason why, and please, I want you to continue in a second, but just to add in there, the reason why I really struggle with that tweet was because you say, okay, well, look, I'm upset. I heard this news. Okay, first of all, you know full well that there's all kinds of misinformation. You have connections at the highest level in Israel and across the world. 100%. Find out behind the scenes when you've got such a huge platform, and more than that, and it's such a tense, possibly existential moment for Israel to start putting people against Israel. And the other thing is that, because I remember speaking to his team, and again, I'm saying this with great gratitude and appreciation to him, but they were saying, how would you feel like, if it was your religion and faith building that you thought was under attack? Excuse me, IDF soldiers are killed sometimes by IDF in friendly fire, but we don't judge them and say, how dare they? We understand they're fighting a war, that they share our values, and that's what really hurt.
Let me take a brief detour, because I know I have to remember putting a pin on this, because we're coming back to what you asked about the Charlie Kirk thing. Let me say this really briefly. I've said this in some other circles. Let me say this on the podcast here. One of the reasons why I and the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel never criticized Israel publicly, people can say, I want to be very, very clear about this, not because we think they're above reproach, no, but because we refuse to be fodder for Al Jazeera, for all the other innumerable Jew-hating. Right. They're not going to quote me. Pastor Dumisani Washington said, no. Not to mention, that's the first reason, right? The first thing is that the vast majority, 99% of stuff out there about Israel is negative. That's the first thing. Secondly, is that, like you, Oliver, I've been doing this for a while. I have Israeli friends and colleagues in the Knesset, right? In the clergy, right? The rabbis, pastors. I have people, and I'm not saying, I have people who are pretty well connected. If I really wanted to have a conversation about something, there's no reason for me to go on somebody's podcast and then postulate about what Netanyahu, Likud, blah, blah, yada, 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 right? If I really want to make my voice heard, I can actually talk to people who are actually have some sort of say. I can actually be heard. So that's what I'm saying. So to your point now, Charlie thing, for you to do that, no. And so I'm coming back to this other part. So for Charlie, the other part of it was not just something like that. And my son talks about in his article, his close association with people like Tucker Carlson. Okay. And again, I want to be very, very clear in this cancel culture world. I am not talking about somebody putting somebody else on blast and writing them off and throwing them into some sort of donkey. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking now about people with the responsibility that lead organizations, have millions of followers. You have a duty and an obligation and responsibility. If your good friend Tucker Carlson is out there lying, maligning, and you have nothing to say about it, and when you put out your poster about who's going to be speaking and he's right there front and center, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with it simply because when is someone, and they'll tell me this often, they'll say, oh, Pastor Dumisani, Charlie was a person who liked to talk and dialogue, and no problem with that. I applaud that. That has nothing to do, however, Oliver, if you and I were friends and you are going to have a convention and you want to have me come speak, and over the last 6 months, I've been trashing Jews, trashing Israel, at the very least, Oliver, you would pick up the phone and say, hey, Dumisani, what is going on here? What is happening here? And if it got bad enough, you might have to at some point go, okay, they would say to you, Oliver, aren't you and Dumisani friends? He just said the Jews, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, I love this example. Dennis Prager, as many of you know who he is, he suffered a fall. He's still recovering in a hospital there in Atlanta. Again, we're praying for you, Dennis. When he was approached about Tucker, remember that arsonist article I told you we wrote? Mm-hmm. He was doing an article with, I guess, Great Britain News. You probably have seen it before. And the young man who was very polite asked him about Tucker's. Yeah. Dennis hadn't seen the video yet. Pretty busy guy, right? And he says, what do you have to say? And that's when he goes on. And Dennis says a couple of things, right? He's very respectful. He's trying to be very careful. He said, I hope I'm wrong about Tucker. He said, but if he's really talking about Christian persecution, he goes on to say, I, as a Jew, talk more about Christians in Nigeria than any other Christian podcaster I know. Some people got upset. And I said, as a person who's been doing this since the 1990s, he is 100% dead right. And what he was doing at that point, he wasn't just addressing Tucker. Every other one of these Christian podcasters with these huge backgrounds who've said nothing, right? It's one thing if you want to touch that. Fine, your podcast is about winning friends and influencing people. Fine, whatever. You don't want people to feel bad about people dying, being slashed and burned. But if you have the audacity and the unmitigated gall to get on your platform and talk about the poor Christians of Bethlehem, without telling them what Bethlehem actually is today. The poor Christians who are suffering the onslaught of the IDF. As a Christian, I must speak out, which is what you got, Oliver, from the TPO-USA team. Like, oh, what about our co-religionists? And I going, you're nicer than me, Oliver, I can tell. I've been like going, dude, are you serious right now? Do you understand what's happening with Christians in Syria? Do you know what's going on with Christians in the, right? So for you to then do that under the cloak of, oh, the poor Christians, and you're a huge organization like TPUSA, who, to my knowledge, has never talked about Christian persecution, I called BS on that. I do. That's for me.
So I'll tell you what I heard. I'll tell you what I heard, and you'll know these lines because we hear them publicly as well. Is that, I mean, we're such big supporters of Israel. And by the way, before I even go there, you say, well, he platformed Tucker. He also didn't platform Candace anymore. So, it's a little bit more nuanced than that still. But so I still think there's
the article. Please read the article. But yes, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Okay. Maybe he felt that it was one too far.
Yes,
but I still think there's multiple things going on here. I still think it's primarily pragmatic. I think if you had to get him in a closed room, I hope he'd be like, obviously, I reject this kind of hostility here. But the point I wanted to get to is that I heard from Charlie's team. They said, we find it hard, Ollie. Like 95% of the time, Charlie's so pro-Israel, and yet when he goes says one thing that's a bit critical, then you guys are all come tumbling down on him. I said, first of all, I wouldn't be having this conversation if I didn't consider Charlie a friend and have respect for him. So, we're allowed to have disagreements. We're allowed to share our perspective. We're not cancelling you. I'm sharing a perspective because I so value his voice, number one. Number two, if, let's say, Charlie's promoting capitalism as an economic system. If he's doing that all day long and you're supporting him for that, but he says, 95% of what I say is pro-capitalism, but then one of his policies is he wants to have 90% tax on the rich, or 100% tax. You can't say, well, I'm 95%. And I said, same thing here. If Charlie started saying that Mossad were behind 9/11, that in fact it makes it even worse because he's got such a big audience with people who are sympathetic to Israel, and you're potentially now going to turn them against Israel. So you have to judge each comment on its own. So I want to know, what do you make of those who are, let's say, in the in-between camps, the Megyn Kellys, etc., who I feel sometimes create these straw men and suggesting I'm just doing a little critique of Israel, whereas actually it's quite serious, and they don't seem to appreciate the existential nature of Israel's battles. And they create these like, oh, you all come crashing down on me the second I go slightly out of line.
Right. It's unfortunate of the times that we live in, Oliver, in this context, that anti-Semitism in the Western world is at levels not seen since the Second World War. There are then legit conversations around free speech, right? Like I said before, all that. So there's a lot of conversations that are being had that are legit conversations, but unfortunately they're being had in the context of the Jews having targets painted on them. And they, as the saying goes, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. So we know what this actually is. So there's a difficulty for many Westerners to actually deal with this with any amount of clarity, right? And not sound dogmatic, right? And I'm saying all this to say this, whether it's Megyn Kelly's, that I've seen some of her stuff, she had Marjorie Taylor Greene on. And my issue, and I've told my kids this since they were young, you have to start with what is true. If you don't have the ability or the willingness to, at the very least, admit what's both true and false, you're dead in the water. If you have to play mind games with yourself or with other people to then massage something, and it's either sometimes things are black and white. Lots of gray areas, Oliver, but sometimes they're not. So when I use the whole Christian persecution thing, Tucker is telling a bald-faced lie that Israel persecutes Christians. In the sentence, that's just it. Are there problems? Do people bicker? Sure, the United States, right? It's the freest country on the planet, and Christians get treated a certain way depending on where you are. That has nothing to do with the government, whether or not I'm insured rights as a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, all that kind of stuff. So even to imply that Israel somehow persecutes Christians is a bald-faced lie from someone who knows what they're talking about, right? So if you can't start there, I'm gonna give you another example. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, as you know, is on a crusade to delegitimize groups like AIPAC and CUFI. She wants those of us who are Christians or Jews who lobby Congress for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. And ladies and gentlemen, lobby is not a bad word. That's me going to the representative and saying, hey, I want our country to do this with this country, right? That's all that is, right? Qatar does it all the time. That's another conversation for another day, right? So she wants those people to register as foreign agents. That Dumisani or CUFI, which I used to be on staff with CUFI, right? Or AIPAC, somehow they're not Americans wanting a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. They are agents of the Israeli government, therefore aren't real loyal dual loyalty, right? That's what she's doing. Okay, here's my point. If you're Megyn Kelly, call that out. It's objective. There's an objective thing, but they're not agents of Marjorie Taylor Greene, unless you have the receipts that the Knesset is cutting checks to somebody. I've been doing this for a while. I have never got a check from the United States, from the Israeli government, ever, right? None of my friends. Unless you can prove that, you need to shut up, and you're going to get a defamation suit at some point. Stop saying that you don't, fine, you have a problem with Israel, or you don't want our tax dollars, blah, blah, say that. Don't call me an agent of a foreign government because I want a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. And that's what I mean by that, Oliver. This is an example. If I can't start by saying what's true, everything becomes a wash.
Yeah, there's been this rising culture in America, particularly on the right, just where people just deal fast and loose with the truth so much. Like, the conspiracy theories are just absolutely wild. And that's not to say there might be some conspiracies that have some truth to them, but it has to be evidence-based, and it's just getting absurd. And what I want to know from your perspective across the pond, as someone that's so embedded in all of this, what percentage would you say are still support on the conservative side in America? Still supportive of Israel? What side are turning on Israel? What are the percentages?
That's a fascinating question. If I'm not mistaken, there was a poll that came out last week. I can't pull it up right now. I don't remember who actually conducted it, but it was something like 80% of Americans still stand with Israel and support Israel's right to defend itself. It was an overwhelming majority. Now, when you break it down, again, politically, most of those on the right, but still, in terms of America, that's still the case. So that is from, I don't know who did the poll, how many people they asked, but we've been seeing those kind of numbers. What we have also been seeing that's also disturbing is that the younger demographic seems to be trending more pro-Palestinian when it comes to like 18 to 30 or something like that, maybe 18, 20 something. I've seen those types of polls as well. But again, the rest of the country, very, very pro-Israel, which is a good thing. The problem, however, and people get upset with me for this, is that culturally, that's not the case. And I want to be, how do I say this? I want to be very clear. Okay, Tucker Carlson's a great lightning rod for this. Here he is with all these anti-Semitic tropes, a very big platform. Marjorie Taylor Greene. People might get shocked. Steve Bannon's out there for the last several months telling people that Israel is not an ally of the United States. It is a protectorate. That Bibi Netanyahu bit off more than he could chew with Iran, and we had to bail them out. The whole thing. I mean, it sounds like Mullah talking points, right? This was going on. And again, here's the danger. No pushback. None. There's none. There's almost none. When I cited Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the conservatives, for full disclosure, I'm a registered independent. I'm neither a Democrat or Republican. I lean right a lot of my politics and everything, but I'll have something to say to both parties. I don't really care, right? What I said to some of my Republican friends was that the mirror image was that Marjorie Taylor Greene unhinged out there going after CUFI and AIPAC. The same way that she says the same thing about AIPAC that Ilhan Omar said about AIPAC 10 years ago, right? And the exact same thing. Who on the right? Who within the House? The Speaker, right? Somebody, Mike Johnson, who is standing before the camera saying, with all due respect from the gentle lady from Georgia, she has every right to say what she wants to say, but she's factually wrong. Nobody is addressing it. That's the danger. So to answer your question, the poll will tell you that most Americans lean towards Israel. But Oliver, that was the poll 10 years ago where the Democrats were concerned.
Yeah.
That's the danger. The danger is that if you're going to let these heavy hitters within the party run around and talk about Israel's doing this and Israel's doing that and Israel with no receipts, with no proof, right? Just out there, they sound like InfoWars dude and Nick Fuentes, right? If you're going to actually let them do that and not say anything, here's what it creates mentally for people to understand psychologically. If someone like a fairly influential congresswoman like Marjorie Taylor Greene or a veteran journalist like Tucker Carlson gets to just do that and still get platformed at a place like TPUSA, okay, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a week ago, you probably saw this posted on X, a text conversation she had with Charlie Kirk. And he had invited her to come to one of their things so they could debate about AIPAC and everything like that, which, okay, two things. Number one, Oliver, okay, that was Charlie. He liked the debate. Number two, but Charlie, she's saying that I'm operating on behalf of, and Kufi, John Hagee, and everybody at AIPAC is representing a foreign government. That's a lie. Why would you then not call that out, but still platform her? That was my problem. Someone just pulled up a clip of Tucker Carlson. I don't have it right now. He's talking about how one of his friends was telling him that Iran is one of the major state sponsors of terrorism, which we all know is true. Tucker pushed back on that and said, Shia Islam is not responsible for hardly any American deaths. The guy was he's standing there on TPUSA's stage and he is advocating for the mullahs of Iran. No pushback. Yeah. That's the danger. The danger is that that's not getting any pushback.
Yeah. So do you agree with my assessment that it is, let's say in the case of Charlie, he had his values, but he also felt he needed to play this cynical game?
Yes. So what you're describing, I've told people often, Oliver, is that we are the Hezekiah. I call it the Hezekiah factor. Let's do this here.
Oh, I like
all
this.
Of us as what's that?
I like this. Do you mean like in terms of when he spoke to the Babylonian messengers?
Yes. All of us as leaders are Hezekiah. Most of us will never be a Moshe, right? But all of us is some sort of Hezekiah in that he was one of the most righteous kings of Judah, was he not? Tear down the high places, but his mistakes, they were there, but they're also existential. Hezekiah got God so angry, didn't Isaiah go to him and say, God says, you know what, dude, this is it. You need to pack it up and get your affairs in order. Why? Because he did good and bad. Charlie, most of us are Hezekiah. And the nuanced conversation, you can't sit there and say Hezekiah was some sort of evil person. He was a good king, nor can you ignore the other stuff he did. Yes, he entertained the ambassadors, spies, come from Babylon. They cased the joint. That's what I told people. That's what they're doing, right? So yes, Isaiah's not there, but he's there when they're leaving. It's an amazing story, right? You could see it playing out like in a play, like on a stage. And Isaiah goes, who are these guys? And Hezekiah said, they came from Babylon. What did you show them? I showed them everything. I showed them the cars in my garage. I showed them the shoes. And here's the thing. He didn't say that part, but he said, I showed them the armory. In other words, he showed them Judah's national defense. So the reason why generations later, Hezekiah, because that was Nebuchadnezzar's grandfather, the reason why it was such a surgical precision on Tisha B'Av was because Hezekiah showed them everything. So when they came in, they knew where this was, where that was, where that was. What's my point? Hezekiah was a good king who made mistakes. Unfortunately for him and the people of Judah, his mistakes were existential. And then, throw this in for good measure, when Isaiah tells them what's going to happen, they're going to come back, take everything during your children's time, Hezekiah's attitude was very narcissistic, was it not? He said, hey, wait, you mean they're going to come and rape, pillage, and plunder during my children's time? As long as I'm okay. You go, whoa, yeah, he was selfish. All of us are Hezekiah. We have our altruism and we have our selfishness. We have our righteousness and we have our unrighteousness. Again, this is it. And what happens is that in our attempts to, someone said this, lionize or demonize Charlie, the reason why it's so inappropriate is because Charlie was not a bad person. I don't agree with some of the things that he did. And I've made some of those things clear, but that's not me pitchforks now. No. Charlie had the good and the bad. The thing where many people are doing now as they're grieving, that Charlie was Moshe, that Charlie, and it's not the case. And some people even watching this right now, if they're still very emotional, they're going to get upset. I'm not dumping on him. I'm saying he's a good guy. I'm just saying that he also had these other things. And some of those things we've actually talked about. I talked about platforming Tucker Carlson advocating for the mullahs of Iran, not getting pushed back. His good friend Marjorie Taylor Greene, him texting her after she's calling for Kufi and AIPAC to be made illegal, right? These are real issues. But Charlie did it. And like you said, another thing my mentor used to say to me, Oliver, our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. It always is. That's the case. The thing that I excel in can also be the thing that I'm most vulnerable to, right? So if I'm a person who likes to sit down with everybody, have a discussion, that's not a bad thing. And then Proverbs also says there are times when someone's a fool and you leave them alone. Is that not what the Mishle says? Yes, right? So that means that I need to know when it's time to sit down and talk and when it's time to get up from the discussion. So if my strength is talking to everybody, which is not a bad thing, then my weakness would be talking to everybody all the time, even when it's no longer appropriate. That for me was Charlie.
Yeah, well, I actually made a video on this just last Tisha B'Av about how the story of Hezekiah, like within his own camp, within the Jewish people, he will speak the truth. But then when the people outside the camp, because the rabbis of the Talmud said he could have been a Messiah, but basically the shortcoming was when you speak to people outside your camp, was he prepared to become a light to the nations? Was he prepared to speak the truth even to them? And he thought, no, with them I have to play a cynical political game. And the second that the empires of the world see Israel not as being this light to the nations, but instead identifying as just another regional player, well, then they're going to get trampled on, right? Yes. But what I wanted to talk to you about in our bonus section, just in the last part, was let's just lean in a bit more into the Judaism versus Christianity, deeper faith potential areas of conflict, and why there aren't areas of conflict for you here when it comes to Israel. And just so we can understand that a bit more deeply, because my sense is that with everything that we're seeing, I kind of feel like there's going to be some kind of inevitable conflict between Jews and some Christians coming down the line. So what I want to know from you is, are the two ideologies inevitably going to come into conflict at some point? In the next bonus section of my interview with Pastor Dumisani, I push him further on how his Christianity shapes his support for Israel. I also ask him about the toughest objections he hears from fellow Christians who are hostile to Israel. I ask him about his thoughts on Christians trying to proselytize Jews, and much more. To join us for this part of the conversation, as well as access a whole new range of JTV Plus premium content, click on the link in the video description. I'll see you there.